It's amazing what I do for my fans. This video exists solely because one of you guys asked me a while back if I knew what these little Dr. Wu figures were like because they seemed interesting, and I had never handled these before, so I didn't know. But I still wanted to be able to answer their question, so I just picked these up, that way I could tell them how they turned out. Anyways, I'm trying to hit 10k subscribers for the channel's second birthday in about a month and a half. If you enjoyed this video by the end, please consider subscribing. It's Dr. Wu's teeny tiny blaster and Skywarp. And when I say these are small, I don't want you to misunderstand. Here they are next to some pewter molds I got at Walmart, which I think are meant for the Transformers board game, that are about the size of D&D minis. Here they are next to a quarter, here they are next to some actual Legends classes, and here they are next to a Headmaster. Yeah, I ain't kidding. These are somewhere between Headmasters and Legend scale. They are so tiny, which makes them fantastic for displaying with Titan figures. This is a lot closer to the scale difference that we should see when it's a car or jet sitting next to a city block that stood up. Obviously, if you aren't into that idea, or just like tiny figures in general, these may not do much for you, especially for the price, considering these come in a 2-pack priced in such a way that breaks down into each figure being about the cost of a deluxe. However, if you watch this video when it comes out, or close enough to it, the Show Z store is currently running a sale on these, for about half off. So for basically $10 a figure, I'd say that these are much more enticing than when I bought them at least. But what am I doing? I haven't even reviewed these yet, and I'm recommending you buy them. I think that might be against the YouTube terms of service. Both of these figures look remarkably good at their scale. The Skywarp especially, praise be upon his name, for we are all him. As when compared to the recent Kingdom Starscream, this actually has more correct details than that, like a properly colored trunk section, though it is perhaps in too light a shade of gray. It's just funny to me that a figure so much bigger can actually suffer on the details when compared to this dinky thing. Now this has a nose cone on its back, and if you know me, you know that I consider that to be a crime against everything that is holy. I will say when it's at this scale, I find it to be a bit more forgivable, especially when everything else is this well handled. This has a ton in common with the Kingdom figure, to the point where it almost just feels like a downscale job, even to where the null rays fall off all the time. Way to get all the details right, guys! Fucking wish you hadn't, though! As for the blaster, this also feels like its bigger brother, though this time it would be its much bigger brother. This really seems like a tiny version of the Kingdom/Legacy Voyager figure, just crushed down into the size of one of the joints on your thumb. Though, unfortunately, it sacrifices having a working tape gimmick, but at this point, any Casseticons he would have would be like 1/3 the size of a dime, or be about equal to a particularly medium sunflower seed. So I don't exactly bleed for its loss, considering that by necessity they would have to suck, and if they could transform, you'd probably need tweezers and a magnifying glass to do it. This, like the Kingdom figure, has the handle strapped along the sides of his legs, which really helps this to feel like a serious downscale. But it has to be a coincidence at this point, because while I will be generous and say that with the Starscream they might have had enough time to reverse engineer and downscale a mold copy of that, with the blaster, the Legacy version barely came out like 2 months ago, and pretty much so did this. So if they reverse engineered that, they deserve some kind of Guinness World Record. Fastest corporate theft of all time. I really have to give this thing props. Despite being tiny and relatively complex, neither one has borderline any gaps in the plastic, which you might be like, yeah, they better not with how small they are. And yeah, totally, but the Hasbro figures, which are only about twice as big, at least in the case of Skywarp, have some level of it, so let's not look a gift horse in the mouth. This little guy is a little weird in how his tape window is offset. This seems to be accurate to some frames of G1, potentially the Dreamwave comic as well, and then the original toy was definitely not centered, so there are a few places this particular design feature could have come from, but all of them are pretty dumb. Animation errors the comic people don't want to talk about anymore, or the toy that this is totally, obviously trying to emulate, right? Like this isn't trying to be the most micro of the masterpieces. A micro masterpiece, if you would. The paint on these guys is remarkably good, and I mean, it could be better considering I can spit on these with a dry mouth and put more saliva on them than there is paint, but they got all the necessary accents, it's nice paint, metallic where it needs to be, and it's crisp like Hasbro only wishes they could do. The heads at this scale are positively amazing. I have fantastic vision, and I feel like I need a magnifying glass to make out these ant-sized protrusions on their shoulders. The detail that is there is relatively simple and almost excessively sharp, but if it weren't, it would probably end up smooth like a faceless mannequin nightmare that is 86 Spike. This can be both set of Skywarp and the blaster. And now, looking at them both back to back, I have to say 2 things. 1, the eyes are painted brilliantly. They shine better than light piping despite being about the size of pinpricks. And 2, both of them have the most gormless, moronic expressions on their faces. They're both just going at the top of their lungs. So, these are amazing little robot modes. They look incredibly good despite being about as small as you can get them. I have a world's tiniest Bumblebee who doesn't pose or transform, and he's only like 1/3 smaller than these guys. So what they managed to accomplish at this scale is borderline miraculous. As for accessories, these guys don't really come with anything. I mean, Skywarp has its null rays, but outside that, it's really just these character cards. They are made out of plastic, but they are a little flimsy, and the quality of the print on them isn't the best. Partially due to the texture, which causes them to make a terrible sound when rubbing them together, but largely, it's just not a high-definition printer they used. And they probably either needed to give their graphic designer better instructions, or they needed a better graphic designer if they gave him good instructions already, because the text is not exactly set up to stand out from the background. And that coupled with the texture, the bad print, and the fact that it's tiny, makes the text almost impossible to read. Seriously, you are going to see this like 30 times bigger than it actually is on your screens, and I sincerely doubt even you will be able to read this with how bad this is. I joke about the stats, but they aren't really funny. Health, attack, and defense. I question the amounts they've given them, but it's not outlandish enough to make jokes about it. I do like the front artwork though. The box was good too, though mine was smashed like no one's business in shipping. Man, I am really stretching for stuff to call accessories. The good news is that for stuff at this scale, they pose amazingly. Blaster has a great head with rotation, side to side, and a ton of tilt up, which is great for a tiny guy like this if you partner him with combiners or titans. Shoulders get slightly more than a 90 out, elbows get like 1 degree more than a 90 bend, though at this scale you can barely tell the difference. No wrists, yes waist, which I'm shocked about at this scale. Legs are unimpeded forward and back and barely impeded out to the side. Normal 90 knees and feet with toe up and a mostly for show rocker. Skywarp's head only swivels and it's really hard to get at. Shoulders pull like 1 degree less than a 90, elbows pull like 2 degrees more than that, but the same problem as before. Wings can move backwards to get out of the way, no wrists, no waist, legs are a little impeded out to the side, they pull like a 45 going forward and like a 10 back, a couple degrees less than a 90 at the knees, and feet have a toe down. So these two are not equals in the posability front. The Blaster is running right up against the Voyager. He is almost at complete parity with that thing. Really, he's only missing the Narcissa wrists, pretty much having everything else in equal measure to the figure whose lower shin he's basically the size of. The Skywarp, and by extension their Seeker mold, in general, while not bad at this scale, is also less than good. It's pretty much acceptable, what you would expect something like this to be like. It's not transcending its scale. Transformation on these two is pretty good. Once again, the Blaster operates almost identically to the Legacy figure. Everything has obviously been simplified, almost making it better, as there's no longer that faux-forming butt plate, and the fists aren't difficult to finagle into position anymore. It does leave it with some problems, but they're minor ones. As for Skywarp, this is literally just exactly the Legacy figure's transformation. There are almost no changes done. This is slightly simplified in one area and slightly more complicated in another, but for the most part, it's unchanged. I will say that the new way the nose cone works always throws me for a loop. It's gotta be in this exact perfect orientation to function, and I always forget what that's supposed to be. So it takes me like a half dozen tries to get it through its hole every time I transform this guy. And the end results are really good. Skywarp especially pulls ahead on this front, being that the changes he made from the core class, which, let's be clear, may not be changes because this could just be convergent design, really helped to make this look better than its official competition. The Legacy figure, and by extension the Kingdom figure, has this complicated apparatus built into the middle of it to allow the head to hinge to the center of the cockpit so it can stick out for no reason. This just does away with that, so the head merely flips around into the torso when you hinge the cockpit, which hides it far more completely and narrows up the nose cone of this bird immensely. That thing looked like a flawed interpretation of the alt mode. This looks like a tiny version of it that jumped off our screens. As for Blaster, we have a few issues that the larger figure didn't have. For starters, while I like the fact that they just printed the fast forward and rewind buttons onto the hips and called it a day for simplicity's sake, it does leave that area looking a little funny, and this is a good bit knobblier from behind. But from the front and sides, it looks roughly as good. So I give this a pass too. And it's honestly the perfect size at this scale to put with your other masterpiece figures, like MP tracks to complete that one scene, or to just have displayed in scale appropriately to the alt mode from the show in general. And what can I say about this set? It's fantastic. At normal price, it does feel a little questionable, but that's just because these feel more like Hasbro Legends than normal third-party Legends. At the same time, despite being tiny, these are doing a great job styling on Hasbro Legends. I don't find either of them to be as satisfying as the Kingdom Core Soundwave, but the Blaster is almost literally the exact same thing as the Voyager, just like 6/7 smaller, and the Skywarp is no slouch too. I say buy these, and I say buy them right now while they're on sale. I don't think you'll regret your choice. These are amazing figures if you are at all interested in something at this scale for whatever purposes you have for them. Whether you just want a pocket or desk toy, or you want something for a Titan to smash. Go for it, trust me. And that's not half of what I have to say, but it's enough what I have to say. And I know, you know, what everyone else tells you to do at the end of these videos. So, if you liked what you saw here, please do that. And if you'd like to take it a step further, then please, share this video with any friend you think may be interested. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me waste your time.